At 11:27 p.m. on a freezing Saturday night in Maran, Iowa, Melody Hoffman's phone did something it had never done before. It began to scream, not with a ringtone, not with a call from a friend, but with a series of frantic, silent pulses, notifications stacking on top of notifications, messages arriving faster than anyone should be sending them at that hour. A camera inside her home caught the pale blue glow of the screen against her face in the darkness. She didn't answer a single one. She didn't say goodnight to her mother sleeping in the next room. She didn't grab a jacket thick enough for the January cold outside. She just stood up, walked to the front door, and stepped out into the dark. That was the last time Melody Hoffman was seen alive inside her own home. Now, I need you to understand something before we go any further, because this case is not like others we've covered on this channel. What happened to Melody Hoffman is horrifying enough on its own. A 20-year-old girl, a secret pregnancy, a boy she trusted completely, and a night that was planned to look like it could never have been planned at all. But what makes this case truly unlike anything I have ever researched, what kept me up at 3 a.m. going through court documents and digital forensic reports with my coffee going cold, is what happened after Melody died. Her Apple Watch recorded her final heartbeats. Her broken iPhone sent text messages after her body was cold, and a GPS app on her mother's phone drew a map in real time of exactly where her killer took her body. Melody Hoffman's phone didn't just witness a murder, it documented one, and almost nobody knows this story. We are going to walk through every layer of this case, the digital evidence, the secret relationships, the interrogation that fell apart in real time, and the mother who stood in a courtroom and said exactly what every person in that room was thinking. Stay with me, because this one matters. Before we go any further into evidence and timelines and courtroom transcripts, I need you to know who Melody Hoffman actually was, because true crime has a way of turning victims into plot devices, names attached to facts, and Melody deserves more than that. Melody was 20 years old. She lived with her mother, Megan, in Maran, Iowa, a small town where everybody knows everybody, which, as we'll find out, is both a comfort and a curse depending on which side of a secret you're standing on. Melody had a mild intellectual disability. Doctors described her cognitive development as functioning at roughly the level of a 14-year-old. What that means practically, and what matters enormously for understanding how this crime was able to happen, is that Melody experienced the world with an extraordinary degree of openness and trust. She didn't have the internal alarm system that most adults develop over time, that quiet, suspicious voice that says, "Something about this doesn't feel right." For Melody, if someone she loved asked her to get in a car at midnight in January, the question she asked herself wasn't, "Should I?" It was simply, "Okay, when?" She loved animals fiercely. She volunteered at a local rescue shelter and knew the names and personalities of every dog in the facility. She collected stuffed animals. She watched the same comfort movies on repeat. She sent her mother good morning texts every single day without fail, something Megan mentioned in her victim impact statement that still breaks me when I think about it. Every single morning, without fail. And Melody was, by every account from people who knew her, a genuinely happy person, not performing happiness, not masking something darker, genuinely, openly, completely happy in the way that some people just are, in a way that makes you realize how rare that actually is. She also happened to be in love, or at least she believed she was. His name was McKinley Lisma. Most people called him Ken. He was 22, lived locally, drove a blue Honda that he kept immaculately clean, which, as we will get to, becomes one of the most critical details in this entire investigation. Melody and McKinley had dated on and off for the better part of a year. Megan, Melody's mother, was not a fan. She had the instincts that Melody lacked. Something about this young man made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up in a way she couldn't fully articulate to her daughter. So instead of banning the relationship, which she knew would only push Melody toward it harder, Megan did something smart. She implemented technology. They shared their GPS locations on the Live 360 app. Melody's location all the time, visible on her mother's phone. It was their agreement. Melody got her independence, Megan got her peace of mind. What neither of them could have anticipated was that this arrangement, this digital leash built on love and compromise, would become the single most important piece of evidence in a murder investigation. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before we talk about what the technology recorded, we need to talk about what was hiding underneath the surface of Melody's life in the weeks before she disappeared. Because beneath that cheerful, open, trusting exterior, something was building. A secret, a biological fact that Melody may not have even fully understood yet, and a young man who absolutely did. If this is your first time here and you're already feeling what I felt when I first opened this case file, go ahead and hit subscribe. I cover cases like this every week with the same depth, the same research, and the same commitment to making sure these names don't disappear. Now let's keep going, because it's about to get a lot more complicated. Megan Hoffman described herself to investigators as a light sleeper, had been since Melody was a baby. Some part of her brain, she said, was always listening for sounds that didn't belong. The particular creak of a floorboard that meant Melody was up and moving in the night. So when she heard the soft click of the front door latch at 11:27 p.m. on the night of January 14th, she was awake within seconds. She reached for her phone, opened Live 360. The little purple dot that represented her daughter was moving. Megan's first text went out almost immediately. "Are you kidding me right now?" The reply came back within 90 seconds. "I'll be back, don't worry." Those 4 words. That's all. No explanation, no name of where she was going or who she was with. Just, "I'll be back, don't worry." Megan stared at the screen. She told investigators later that something about the reply felt slightly off. Not wrong enough to call the police, but wrong enough that she didn't put the phone down. She kept watching the dot. The dot moved south, then east. It drifted through residential streets, past the gas station on Miller Road, and settled, hovered, near the edge of Morgan Creek Park, a public space completely empty at midnight in January, Iowa. Megan kept texting, "Who are you with?" No response. "Melody, answer me." No response. Then, at exactly 1:03 a.m., something happened that Megan said she will never forget as long as she lives. The purple dot turned gray. In the Live 360 app, when a user manually cuts their location sharing, the dot goes gray, and the other user receives a notification. Location sharing paused. Which means Melody, or someone holding Melody's phone, deliberately turned off the GPS at 1:03 a.m. Megan sat up in bed. She called the phone. No answer. She called again. Voicemail. She sent 3 more texts in rapid succession. "Where are you? Call me now. I'm calling the police." And then she did something that I think captures exactly the kind of mother she is. She got dressed. Coat, boots, keys. She drove to Morgan Creek Park herself at 1 a.m. in January to find her daughter. She found nothing. Empty parking lot, empty trails, just cold and darkness, and the particular silence of a place where something terrible has already happened and left. She drove home. She called the non-emergency police line. She was told that an adult could not be reported missing until 24 hours had passed. She sat on her couch and watched her phone. And then her phone lit up. A text from Melody's number. "On my way home. Leave the door open for me." Now, I need you to sit with this for a moment, because this detail, this one specific detail, is the part of this story that made my stomach drop when I first read the case file. Megan Hoffman was not texting her daughter. She was texting a killer. McKinley Lisma, or someone in his company that night, was sitting somewhere in the dark, holding Melody's phone, composing text messages designed to sound like Melody, buying himself time. Time to clean up, time to drive, time to make sure that when the sun came up and the police eventually did get involved, enough hours had passed to muddy the timeline. On my way home, leave the door open for me. Melody Hoffman was already dead when that message was sent. But here is where McKinley Lisma made the kind of mistake that overconfident killers always make. He assumed that turning off the GPS meant the digital trail was gone. He assumed that a few text messages would reset the clock convincingly enough. He forgot about the Apple Watch. Melody wore an Apple Watch Series 7 on her left wrist every day. She'd had it for about 8 months at the time of her death. And like most Apple Watch users, she'd never thought much about the health data it was quietly, continuously, obsessively collecting. Heart rate, every few minutes, automatically. The watch recorded Melody's resting heart rate throughout the day of January 14th. Normal, consistent, the rhythmic, unremarkable data of a healthy 20-year-old going about her life. Then at 12:41 a.m. on January 15th, 44 minutes after she walked out her front door, 38 minutes after the last GPS ping at Morgan Creek Park, the watch recorded something catastrophic. Her heart rate spiked to 163 beats per minute. 163 beats per minute. That is the heart rate of someone in absolute terror, of someone fighting for their life, of someone whose body has flooded itself with adrenaline because every survival instinct it possesses has activated simultaneously. And then the line drops. Not gradually, not in the slow, peaceful descent of someone falling asleep. It drops in the sharp, definitive way that a line drops when a heart stops. At 12:44 a.m., Melody Hoffman's final heartbeat was recorded. McKinley Lisma would later tell investigators he was home asleep at 12:44 a.m. The watch said otherwise. Melody's body was found at Lily Lake, a narrow body of water about 2.5 miles from Morgan Creek Park, by a jogger at approximately 7:15 a.m. on the morning of January 15th. She was partially clothed. She had sustained multiple severe lacerations consistent with a bladed weapon. There was evidence of restraint on her wrists. The Marion County Medical Examiner ruled the cause of death as homicide within hours. The manner, blood loss from multiple stab wounds, compounded by blunt force trauma to the head. She had been left in the cold, in the dark, alone. But when the full autopsy results came back 48 hours later, the lead investigator, Detective Sandra Okafor, received a phone call that she later described in court testimony as the moment the entire shape of the case changed. Melody Hoffman was pregnant. Early stage, approximately 6 weeks. At that gestational point, many women don't yet know, and investigators who reviewed Melody's personal journals, her texts, her search history, found no indication that she was aware of the pregnancy. No prenatal vitamin purchases, no OB searches, no conversations with friends that referenced it even obliquely. The working theory, supported by the hormone levels documented in the autopsy, is that Melody did not yet know she was pregnant when she died. But here is the critical question that Detective Okafor says consumed her for the first 48 hours of the investigation. Did McKinley know? Because the answer to that question was the difference between a crime of passion and a premeditated murder. And the answer, as investigators would piece together through phone records and witness interviews, was yes, McKinley Lisma knew. Here is how they established that. In the 2 weeks preceding Melody's death, McKinley had conducted a series of internet searches on a device that law enforcement was able to obtain via warrant. The searches were not subtle. They included variations of phrases around pregnancy and legal options and costs. They included searches for specific abortion providers in Iowa and neighboring states. And they included, and this is the search that prosecutors would later highlight in their closing argument, a search conducted at 2:17 p.m. on January 12th, 2 days before Melody died. The search was, what happens to a baby if the mother dies early in pregnancy? He was researching what he was going to do before he did it. But the pregnancy alone, as devastating as it is, doesn't fully explain the calculation behind what happened to Melody Hoffman on that January night. Because McKinley Lisma had another complicating factor in his life, another woman, another relationship, and, by a coincidence that reads more like cosmic irony than actual coincidence, another pregnancy. Her name was Nakia Pearson. She was 21. She and McKinley had been in a relationship that overlapped significantly with his on and off involvements with Melody. Nakia was, in McKinley's own words to friends, his main girl. She was the relationship he cared about sustaining, the one he told people was serious. Nakia was also pregnant, further along than Melody, approximately 14 weeks at the time of Melody's death. And Nakia did not know about Melody's pregnancy. In McKinley's mind, and we can reconstruct this through his messages, through witness accounts, through the confession elements that emerged during his interrogation, he was looking at two parallel situations that threatened to collide publicly and catastrophically. Nakia's pregnancy was visible, progressing, and tied to a future he wanted. Melody's pregnancy was invisible, early, and tied to a past he was desperate to bury. He made a decision. Not in a single moment of rage, not impulsively. The search history tells us that. The Walmart purchases tell us that. The people he recruited to help him tell us that. This was a plan. And Melody Hoffman, a girl who loved animals and sent her mother good morning texts every single day, walked out her front door and into it because she trusted a boy who had decided, in the coldest possible terms, that she was a problem to be solved. McKinley Lisma came in voluntarily. That fact is worth noting because it tells you something about his state of mind in those initial hours after Melody's body was found. He believed he was untouchable. He believed that turning off the GPS, that sending those text messages from her phone, that whatever cleaning had been done in that blue Honda, he believed all of it had worked. He came in with the confidence of someone who thinks they've built a room with no doors. Detective O'Coffer let him talk. This is, by the way, the single most effective interrogation technique in existence, and it is wildly underused. You let them build the lie. You let them construct it, nail it together, seal every joint. Because a lie is only as strong as the story it's built around, and the more detailed the story, the more places it can crack. McKinley told Detective O'Coffer that he and Melody had broken up in December, that they were on good terms, no drama, no hard feelings, just two people who'd run their course. He said he hadn't seen her in weeks. He said the last time they spoke was a brief text conversation around Christmas, just catching up, nothing significant. He said he had been home the entire night of January 14th, in bed by 10, didn't hear from Melody, had no idea anything was wrong until he saw posts on social media the next morning about her being missing. Detective O'Coffer nodded. She wrote things down. She asked follow-up questions in a tone so neutral it was almost meditative. And then she opened the manila folder. Ken, I want to ask you about a trip you took to Walmart on January 13th. That's the day before Melody went missing. We pulled the purchase records. Can you tell me what you were shopping for? The receipt showed 3 purchases that individually have innocent explanations. Together, in context, they tell an unambiguous story. 3 machetes, purchased from the sporting goods section. McKinley's explanation, camping, a trip he was planning with some friends in the spring. He liked to be prepared. 1 roll of heavy-duty duct tape, also for camping, he said, utility purposes. 1 box of nitrile gloves. Cleaning, he said. He'd been doing work on the car. Detective Okafor looked at the receipt. She looked at McKinley. 3 machetes, she said. That's a lot of machetes for 1 camping trip. He said he was buying them as gifts, 1 for himself, 1 for a friend named Dakota, 1 for another friend named Logan. Detective Okafor wrote that down. She thanked him for the clarification. Then she asked about the trunk of the blue Honda. Here is what investigators found inside the trunk of McKinley Lisma's blue Honda during a search executed on the morning of January 15th, approximately 4 hours after Melody's body was discovered. Blood. Human blood, later DNA matched to Melody Hoffman. Not trace amounts, not a smear, a significant volume, partially cleaned, but not completely. The kind of cleaning that happens quickly with panic, without the luxury of time or proper materials. A discarded nitrile glove. 1 glove. The other was never found. A section of duct tape crumpled and used with hair fibers attached. The fibers matched Melody's DNA profile. And on the carpeted surface of the trunk floor, partially wedged beneath the false bottom where the spare tire lives, investigators found a single item that became the most discussed piece of physical evidence in the entire trial. Melody Hoffman's Apple Watch band. Not the watch itself. The watch had been disposed of separately and was never recovered. But the band, the soft silicone band that she'd worn every day for 8 months, was in his car, stained with her blood. The same watch that recorded her heart rate spiking to 163 beats per minute at 12:41 a.m. The same watch that recorded her final heartbeat 3 minutes later. That band, in his trunk, was McKinley Lisma telling on himself in the most visceral way possible. When Detective Okafor presented him with the trunk evidence, the interrogation changed character entirely. The composure evaporated. Not dramatically, not the television version of a suspect breaking down and confessing everything in a cathartic rush. It was quieter than that, and in many ways more disturbing. He went very still. He asked for a lawyer. He asked twice. And then he said something that Detective Okafor noted in her report specifically because of how it landed in the room. He said, "I didn't think you'd find the band." Not, "I don't know how that got there." Not, "Someone must have put that there." Not, "I want to talk to my attorney before we continue." "I didn't think you'd find the band." Which is not the statement of an innocent man trying to understand how his car contains evidence of his ex-girlfriend's murder. It is the statement of a guilty man calculating what was and wasn't left behind. McKinley Lisma stopped talking after that, but the investigation had everything it needed to keep moving. The machete receipt listed 3 items. McKinley named 2 people. Dakota Van Patten was 23. He had known McKinley for approximately 4 years through a shared social circle. People who knew Dakota described him variously as a follower, someone who wanted to be liked, someone who didn't know how to say no to people he considered above him socially. One mutual acquaintance told investigators that Dakota would do anything to stay in the group. Logan, whose last name I am withholding because his legal situation was still pending resolution at time of filming, was 20, the youngest of the 3. He had met McKinley only 7 months before the murder. He later told investigators he genuinely did not believe when McKinley first approached him with the plan that it was real. He thought it was posturing, bravado, the kind of dark, hypothetical conversation that some young men have in the way they'll say, "I could kill him," about a coworker they dislike, with absolutely zero literal intent. He realized it was real when McKinley showed him the receipt. Logan's cooperation with investigators, and he cooperated fully, early, and in extensive detail, is the reason we know as much as we know about what was planned and how. In exchange for his testimony, he received a reduced charge. He did not participate directly in Melody's death, but he knew. He was present in the peripheral sense. He was, in the language of the law, a material witness to the planning of a premeditated murder. And what he told Detective Okafor in his recorded statement is the most chilling piece of testimony in this entire case. He said, "We all planned it. We just wanted to see what it felt like." Let me repeat that, because I want to make sure it lands properly. We just wanted to see what it felt like. Not, "McKinley pressured me and I was afraid." Not, "I thought it was a joke until it was too late." His initial explanation, before he understood the full legal gravity of his situation, was that collective curiosity was the motive, that a group of young men had collectively arrived at the decision to take a human life in order to satisfy some dark, formless desire to experience the act of it. He walked that back substantially under further questioning, and the prosecution's theory, supported by the digital evidence, the pregnancy motive, the insurance of McKinley's searches, is that the stated motive from Logan was either a partial truth or a performance of nihilism designed to obscure the more calculated financial and relational motives that McKinley actually held. McKinley needed Melody gone. Logan and Dakota were tools he recruited to that end. But Dakota's story has its own layer of horror. When investigators searched the basement room where Dakota slept at his family home, they found Melody's glasses. Not hidden, not buried under a mattress, or stuffed in a bag 3 towns over the way someone would discard evidence they understood to be dangerous. Sitting on his bedside table, in plain sight, like a keepsake. The prosecutor who handled the physical evidence portion of the trial described it this way in her closing. Those glasses were not forgotten. They were kept, deliberately, as though they had value to him, as though what he had participated in was something to be remembered and revisited rather than something to be buried and escaped from. Dakota Van Patten stopped talking after that, but the investigation had everything it needed to keep moving. The prosecutor's defense team, in an arguably desperate attempt to distribute culpability, pointed the fingers squarely at Dakota during trial. McKinley claimed that Dakota had produced a firearm during the events of that night and effectively coerced McKinley against his will. He claimed he tied Melody's wrists under duress. He claimed the plan was Dakota's idea. The jury spent 11 minutes deliberating before dismissing this narrative entirely. 11 minutes. Because the phone records showed that McKinley initiated contact with both Dakota and Logan in the week before the murder. Because the Walmart receipt showed McKinley's debit card. Because the internet searches came from a device registered to McKinley's Apple ID. Because it was Melody who texted McKinley at 11:24 p.m. to ask what time he was coming, not the other way around, which means he had told her he was coming, which means she walked out that door because he had told her to. And because Logan told the truth. McKinley Lisma built this plan. McKinley Lisma initiated it. McKinley Lisma executed it. And McKinley Lisma then sat across from his victim's grieving mother at a Walmart checkout line 3 days after her daughter's body was found. This detail emerged during witness testimony from a store employee who recognized both of them and looked her in the eyes and said he was so sorry for her loss. He had been shopping for air fresheners for his car. Before we get to the trial, and trust me, you need to hear what happened in that courtroom. If this investigation is the kind of content you want more of, subscribing takes 2 seconds and it genuinely means everything for the channel. We don't do clickbait. We don't rush cases. Every video gets the time it deserves. Okay, back to McKinley Lisma, because a jury was about to spend 9 days dismantling every lie he ever told. The trial of McKinley Lisma lasted 9 days. 9 days during which the digital evidence was laid out in front of a jury with the kind of methodical, devastating clarity that only becomes possible when a victim's own technology has documented her murder. The Apple Watch data was presented through a forensic digital analyst who spent 3 hours explaining heart rate monitoring to a jury of 12 people who, by the end of it, understood viscerally and completely what a heart rate of 163 beats per minute means, and what a line going flat means, and what it means for that data to exist on a device found in the trunk of a specific blue Honda at a specific time on a specific morning. The live 360 GPS records were displayed on a large screen in the courtroom, the animated recreation of the purple dot moving through Maran's streets toward Morgan Creek Park, then going gray, then going silent. Several jurors, according to court observers, visibly reacted when the dot turned gray. The text messages sent from Melody's phone after her death were read aloud by a paralegal in a neutral voice, flatly, without inflection, which somehow made them more horrible than if they'd been performed dramatically. "On my way home, leave the door open for me," in a flat, neutral, legal voice to a mother who was by that point in the trial openly weeping. The Walmart receipt, the trunk evidence, the watch band, the search history, Logan's testimony, the glasses on Dakota's bedside table. Each piece of evidence was a brick, and the prosecution spent 9 days building a wall. McKinley Lisma's defense team did what defense teams do in cases where the evidence is overwhelming. They contested the procedural integrity of individual pieces. They argued chain of custody on the digital forensics. They suggested that Logan was an unreliable witness motivated by his own legal self-interest, and they leaned heavily on the coercion narrative involving Dakota. They were professional and thorough, and they had very little to work with. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 22 minutes. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: first-degree premeditated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice. McKinley Lisma stood and received the verdict with the same studied composure he had brought to the interrogation room. If he felt anything, he did not show it. He straightened his jacket, he looked at the jury, he looked away. And then it was Melody Hoffman's turn. Victim impact statements in murder trials are among the most human moments the legal system produces. They are the place where the law pauses its procedural formality and allows grief to speak in its own language, without restriction, without objection, without a judge managing the clock. Melody Hoffman had been sitting in that courtroom for 9 days, watching every piece of evidence, listening to every witness, watching the man who killed her daughter perform composure for an audience. She had held herself together with a precision that people in the gallery described as almost frightening. Not cold, never cold, but contained, like someone who had decided that she would not give him the satisfaction of her falling apart in his presence. She stood. She walked to the microphone. She looked at McKinley Lisma, and she said, "You messed with the wrong mama." The courtroom, according to every report from people present, went completely still. She continued. She spoke for 11 minutes. She talked about Melody's good morning texts. She talked about the shelter dogs Melody knew by name. She talked about the stuffed animals on Melody's bed and the particular way Melody laughed, loud and completely unself-conscious, the kind of laugh that made other people laugh just by being in the same room as it. She talked about what it means to watch a GPS dot go gray and understand in your bones before anyone has confirmed anything that your child is already gone. She talked about a mother's instinct and how she knew something was wrong the second she read, "I'll be back, don't worry," Because Melody never talked like that. Melody would have said something specific. Melody would have said where she was going. Because Melody didn't understand that she needed to be evasive. That was not her nature. It was not who she was. "He sent me that message," Megan said, looking directly at McKinley, "holding my baby's phone with her blood still on his hands, and he wanted me to go back to sleep. He wanted me to trust it. He thought I wouldn't know the difference between my daughter and a monster pretending to be her. He was wrong." The judge sentenced McKinley Lisma to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mandatory sentencing, state law, no discretion required. McKinley Lisma will die in prison. He is 22 years old. In the weeks after the verdict, I kept coming back to one thing. Not the watch data, as extraordinary as that evidence is, not the text messages from a dead girl's phone, not even the GPS dot going gray. What I kept coming back to was the glasses on Dakota's bedside table, because that detail tells you something about the nature of this crime that goes beyond the specific individuals involved. It tells you about how dehumanization works, how a person can be reduced in someone else's mind to an object, a thing that happened, something to be remembered the way you'd keep a souvenir. Melody Hoffman was a 20-year-old girl with a mild intellectual disability who trusted people completely and without reservation. In another context, in a different world, that quality, that radical openness, that total absence of cynicism would be recognized as extraordinary, as something to be protected and cherished. In this world, it made her a target. And I think about that a lot, because Melody is not the first person like her in a case like this, and she will not be the last. People with intellectual disabilities are, statistically, at significantly elevated risk of becoming victims of violent crime. They are more likely to be manipulated, more likely to be deceived, more likely to be in situations where the people around them understand the power imbalance and choose to exploit it rather than protect against it. McKinley Lisma understood that power imbalance. He used it. He planned around it. Melody trusted him because that was who she was, and who she was should not have been a liability. It should have been safe. The digital evidence in this case, the Apple Watch, the GPS, the deleted records that weren't fully gone, speaks to something important about where we are technologically. The devices we wear and carry are, increasingly, witnesses to our lives in ways we don't fully comprehend. They collect data we forget is being collected. They retain records we don't think we are retaining. In Melody's case, this was the difference between a case that might have gone cold and a case that went to trial with comprehensive, unimpeachable forensic evidence. But technology is not the answer to the vulnerability that Melody Hoffman represented. Megan's Live 360 app gave investigators a map. It did not give her back her daughter. What Melody needed, what people like Melody need, is a world that takes seriously the responsibility of being trusted by someone who trusts completely, that takes that trust as something sacred rather than something to be manipulated. McKinley Lisma did not take it as something sacred. He is 22 years old, and he will die in prison. Melody was 20 years old, and she will not grow older. Dakota Van Patten's trial is pending. At the time of publishing, no date has been set. When that trial happens, I will be covering it. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss that video, because Dakota's story has details we didn't get to fully explore today, and they matter. I will not let this case go quiet. Logan remains in the community under the terms of his plea agreement. His specific conditions are a matter of ongoing legal proceedings, and I will not be speculating about them here. Megan Hoffman continues to advocate publicly for better legal protections for adults with intellectual disabilities who are victims of violent crime. She has spoken at state legislative hearings. She is, by all accounts, exactly the kind of person her daughter believed she was: ferociously loving, absolutely relentless, and not remotely finished. She sent me a message when I reached out to her research team about this video. She said one thing, and she said I could share it. She said, "Tell them her name." That's all. Just tell them her name. So, her name was Melody Hoffman. She loved animals. She sent her mother a good morning text every single day. She laughed loud and completely and without embarrassment. She trusted people with her whole heart. She deserved so much more time. If this case hit you the way it hit me, please share it. Not for the numbers, because Melody's story deserves to travel further than the Iowa courtroom where it concluded. Leave me a comment telling me which moment stopped you cold. For me, it was the text message. On my way home, leave the door open for me. I cannot shake that line. I don't think I'm supposed to. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Every video on this channel is researched and written with this same level of care. No rushed cases, no recycled headlines, just the full story, told the way it deserves to be told. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and take care of the people in your life who trust the world completely, because that trust is a gift, and it needs to be protected. I'll see you in the next one.